Well, we're in it now. It's too late. We're live, so this is it. This is the intro right here. Welcome to Secondary Education. We are live. It's Josh Doe, Amar Khan, and Will Ovendahl. I'm so used to saying Annex. I'm so used to saying Amar Annex. I was like, oh right, Annex is not his last name. I haven't called you by your first and last since grade school, man.
What if I just went by Amar X, like Malcolm X? If I just fucking cut the fat, trim the fat.
You can.
I'd say commit.
Yeah, just commit. You gotta like legally change your last name to X, and then like that's fine. Then we'll call you that.
No, fuck. I mean, the legal system's one thing. You just gotta be that. Like, if you want to be Amar X, like.
No, I'm not with that. You gotta change your name legally. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
Well, who cares? Why do you care about the government, bro? You're bigger than the government. Amar X is bigger than the government. He doesn't respect no papers.
No, but it's about the statement. It's about like the serious symbolism. Anyone who's ever really changed their last name in a meaningful way has done it in the eyes of the law.
Okay. It's official. If I do it, then I'm gonna do it. But if I don't, then it doesn't count.
I think so.
It is what it is.
I think so.
I agree.
So
I can tell you
Doe, Amar X, later possibly. Will Ovendahl.
Future
here with secondary education.
What is the opposite
Sorry,
of
but
FK?
it really sucks to interrupt someone in the middle of the intro, but I just did it to you. So it's a bad intro. It's all right. We're here. We're here now.
Wow, that's a huge water bottle, Josh.
It's 2 liters.
What is that? 64 fluid ounces? What
exactly.
is that?
You did the unit conversion perfectly.
That is. Can I see it? Can we show it real quick?
This is it with my head. Yeah.
Your head is for audience skill. Josh's head is huge. He's got the biggest fucking head out of any of us. He's got a bigger head than Will.
Because these glasses, they don't do justice to how big my head is. They actually look like they fit my face.
That's insane.
But these are so amazing glasses. They're anomalous glasses in size. Yeah, probably like third standard deviation in largeness.
We're nailing it. This is what the audience wants to hear. We're nailing this.
Well, I mean, if we're a visual medium, if we're just an audio medium too, just for the people that are just listening, it's a big water bottle.
I don't think they are because well, there's a couple of reasons. One being we haven't released on Spotify or Apple or any of the listening podcast programs.
It's going to be a SoundCloud podcast.
Right. SoundCloud we could even do, but we haven't released there, so they're not doing.
Are you on SoundCloud?
Yeah.
And we also we have no viewers, so no one's listening.
We got some bots in the back.
So this is a conversation truly for the backloggers coming back for us because we made it big.
Yeah.
The moment Amar X put that document in the government box and it was official, it was like he just blew up, and so we're just reflecting on that retrospectively.
True.
This is a premonition. This is a premonition of the future. You heard it here first.
We don't know. This episode's gonna be a deep cut.
What are our topics today?
Do you want to pass the horn in order?
Yeah.
Let's have everyone just like intro their topics.
Josh, what are your topics today?
Oh, okay. My topic today, we're gonna do a zero COVID update. So, December 8th, China lifted zero COVID restrictions, and all hell broke loose. But we're not really sure like to what extent. We're just gonna kind of get caught up today. What is it? 2 months after the date, and see what we know, and just talk about what we know. Yeah, that's it.
Well, what about you?
So today I'm following up on the earthquakes that happened in Turkey and Syria. We talked about it briefly last week, but since then there's been really just a lot of follow-up, and we've seen some of the aftermath and heard personal stories and things. And one of the things I really wanted to get into with you guys is just like really more on the Syrian side in regards to the civil war. That was really where I was doing my research, but we'll get into that when we get into it.
Yeah, and that's gonna be.
How about you, Amar?
It's been a big weekend and a big week in athletics. A few days ago, LeBron James set the scoring record for the NBA, which is crazy, which is very crazy. So we got to talk about that because it is very historical, and we might never see it again get broken. We might not. And then, there was a great Super Bowl game on last night and a great performance by Riri. So we're just going to chop it up, talk a little bit about that, because sports is for everybody. It's about inclusivity. And it was just a good week. So we'll digest some of that. It'll be a little lighter. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about Josh, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
I want to do this one first because we've been wanting to talk about it for months, really, and we just haven't. We've just been waiting, so I'm eager.
Yeah, we were off for a bit, so
Yeah, this was, we were gonna make this our big topic right before I left for South Africa, and then we were gonna record it when I was in Africa, and then we were gonna record it when we got back, and then it's just been too long. So it's time we finally get into this discussion. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, we can play catch up a little bit. So let's start with just initial impressions on because we haven't had this conversation yet. So we'll start from the beginning. We'll pretend like it's December 10th right now, and this was just lifted. We had all the protests around zero COVID popping up around China, and it was a moment that we haven't seen in modern Chinese history, where civilians were coming out in great numbers and very publicly protesting these restrictions, because it had really gotten to a point where people, how long has China been under lockdown? 2.5 years now, right? Yeah,
since it started. Yeah. Well, and just on the sports tip, some people said that a big reason that the protests really picked up steam was because this was back when the World Cup was going down.
Right.
And China, they've been think back to where we were in March 2020. They've still been there the whole time. We can get into some of the tactics, I'm sure we will, that they used that made the protests so fierce. But when they were watching the World Cup in Qatar, they're like, hey man, the whole world's over there, and they're not really wearing masks.
Right.
And we're we're stuck in our houses by government order. And so the protest movement wound up being really, really large, just because they were the zero COVID policy was really that same policy that we started with in 2020, that they just never banned it. They never got rid of that or lifted it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a crazy thing to think that the World Cup really put that much pressure on Chinese civilians to go out and and march for their freedom in the streets. I just think it speaks to how austere you can make a society before it starts to crack, But I'd be remiss not to mention that the protests, at least in name, they began as a reaction to a quarantine facility burning down, and it a number of people who were quarantined in the facility, they died in that fire, and I think the reason why that was an important event is because it pointed to how the government was imposing this restriction to a point of inconsideration towards their citizens, and it had reached a point of impracticality, right? I think it was a mixture of those things, that it was a disaster that was avoidable, mixed with this growing impression in China that there was a real impracticality to this restriction, that it was a greater evil than a good at that point. And I think the World Cup definitely showed them that the world had moved on, and we're just still living in this pandemic reality in real time, and suffering in our daily lives, when the rest of the world is functioning mostly normally at this point.
FOMO.
Yeah, and
Major FOMO.
China really, they had it wasn't just FOMO, it was so much more intense, right? I don't know how widespread this was, but there was definitely stories in the news that like the Chinese government would take people who, I don't know if they thought they were like flight risks from quarantine or something like that, but they would actually like weld doors shut, right? Like people were literally trapped in their homes to the point where like people were saying like, what do I do about groceries? How do I, I want to walk my dog. These types of problems were coming in. And so when that's part of the public mood, it's just like, hey, like they're literally locking us in, and then something burns down and the people can't escape. I don't know if that's directly related, but I remember people drawing a lot of those parallels.
Right, for sure. And like I think like this is not to understate how restrictive these restrictions really were on people in their daily lives. Like we saw it in Shanghai during like that huge like lockdown disaster that China imposed in Shanghai. What was it, like middle of last year, right? But it's like not even just Shanghai where those kinds of restrictions existed. Like I know that like within my family itself, like my grandma, for example, like she to like leave her house for groceries, like if she went to go get groceries and she hadn't made a doctor's visit or she hadn't like gotten a PCR test within like 3 days, she wouldn't be allowed to buy groceries. So she'd have to make an appointment, go out and walk to a facility, get a PCR test and wait for the results to come back before she could even buy food for herself.
That's crazy.
And that's like
that's
every
crazy.
3 days that you have to do this, right? It's like and they know you when you go to the grocery store because you're paying with WeChat, right?
Right.
So like they have your identification. It's a very centralized system and they can control your transactions that way,
Yeah, it's all on one app. The phone becomes
Right.
the interface to society at that point, and yeah, that's intense.
Right.
Go ahead.
One thing that interests me is that like they're like on the high end of the estimates for like late 2022, people were saying like of like the 1.4 billion people in China, some health officials, and again like it's so it's so like which health officials, right? Because sometimes it's a little cloudy. It's cloudy in America, but it's also cloudy there. But they're estimating that possibly already like 80% of the population had been infected. That was like the highest number, right? Which is like, that's like what we went through too. But obviously, like what you see on either on paper, or like what the official reports are, there's a discrepancy amongst what people think the actual population was infected with as far as the numbers go. So it's just wild because like that was the first thing that I always found really interesting when COVID popped off, because China was winning at not getting its population infected at the beginning for years, right? And I was like, that's pretty cool. And yeah, everybody had a question about whether or not it was legitimate, but to me, I think for between 2020 to 2021, their COVID policy was effective for maintaining, right? And so that was always kind of this thing where it was like a ticking time bomb, because we kind of know how infectious and how these things spread, especially with different variants, like we saw in late 2021 when Omicron pretty much got everybody.
Right.
Except the Chinese, though, they were fine. Like their numbers were not that drastic for that winter,
Yeah.
but globally it was pretty terrifying, right? So it's like, okay, they survived this one, but then eventually things are going to catch up. That's how it works, right? But what I think is just interesting is because people want to ask what is right, like which policies were effective, right? And it's kind of like pick your poison. Like, do you want to go through 2 years of waiting out the most intense death rates, right? Where you're figuring out how to deal with this thing, medically speaking. So if you keep the hospital rates low, it's better, because once they get high, you're going to be able to treat it a little bit effectively, unless your hospitals are overloaded, right? Which we do see happen in a lot of places. But to me, it's still this big great thing of like, I don't know, the question of effectiveness is always interesting when we talk about COVID, because I don't think anything is. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Josh. So that was kind of what was leading up to December 10th. These protests come out. People are going out there. There was things about like the white paper protest, right?
Right.
Because about the information all being on the one app, and so you're saying like, oh, we can't say anything, so it's just a white piece of paper.
Right.
That isn't necessarily related to zero COVID, but you kind of got this like mix of censorship protest, anti-G protest, and COVID protest going at the same time. And at that point in mid-December, it seems like the CCP, the Chinese party, was just like, this is getting really out of hand, and we don't know what we're doing with the zero COVID. Fine, like they really want it to be over. Like, let's end the protests like this, and then everyone who's gonna get sick after that, like they're just gonna have to deal with the consequences, right? Like, and that was about 2 months ago, and since then it seems like COVID has been spreading through China like wildfire, right? It's just absolutely
really
like
quickly.
Everybody's getting it. And one thing to know about the just Chinese health and things. So first off, you have to remember, like, whereas we had our waiting period and then things kind of opened up, and then like that kind of came with like strong our vaccines, which people debate the effectiveness of, but like no matter how effective ours was or wasn't, no one thought the Chinese vaccine was as effective, so they had less protection. Additionally, you've got like this huge population numbers, so you've got lots of people going into the hospital system, right? That was the one thing that we were trying to avoid at the beginning, where we said like if too many people get in the hospital system, we can't save everyone. So then they started burning past that threshold. And then another thing to know just about Chinese health in general is they actually have higher rates of diabetes per capita than we do. And so as far as comorbidities go, like people say like, oh, Americans are so unhealthy, and it's not to say that we're doing great, but like, Chinese society is not necessarily, like, discard the stereotypes about like, just Asian health and everything like that. Like, it's there's plenty of food and smoking and drinking and, bad health outcomes that are going on there too. And so there's lots of comorbidities that was leading into COVID spread. So, and again, a population that is not inoculated to the virus because they were actually held down for almost 3 years. And so I guess that was what I last checked in on. And so, Josh, can you tell us a little more how did it go?
So I want to say that like there's a couple things that I think are touchy in like the narrative that we hear a lot, and like this is part of like why I feel like motivated to talk about this. I think there's a lot of great coverage that exists, but I think it should be noted that like I think in a lot of popular coverage, like it is touted that like the Chinese vaccine is not effective, right? Like it's talked about as if it were like just like a bum vaccine, but like it does have like a decent efficacy rate for preventing like serious infection. It's not as good as like the mRNA vaccines, and certainly there is a lot of stubbornness on the Chinese part to keep the mRNA vaccines outside of like mainland China. Mm-hmm. But like 2 or 3 doses of the Chinese vaccine does have a very positive effect in preventing serious infection.
Now, my understanding of that was definitely true of the first couple variants of COVID, but we had to update for Omicron. And do you know that if China had an Omicron update for their vaccine as well? Because I had heard that they had not, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, I am not 100% sure either. But I mean, from what I've read, and like I'm not like I can't like give out like the most specific and like most handy information here, but like my understanding is that like the Chinese vaccine is reasonably effective at preventing serious infection against Omicron as well. That's my understanding, right? But like I think like one of the big problems in China is vaccine rates. And like I think they have a similar problem to the US in that sense, that like a lot of Chinese people don't like needles. They don't like getting jabbed. There's a very strong culture in China for homeopathic medicine or like Eastern medicine, right? Like they have like like Chinese medicine is a practice unto its own, and a lot of people in China, they want to treat themselves with like ginseng and ginger, right? Like a lot of people, like recently, especially like in the countryside, during this like most recent outbreak, when they're asked like how they're planning to treat themselves in the case of infection, a lot of them say like the only thing they have to fight, they don't have cold medicine. They're not going to get cold medicine because it's very hard to get their hands on. Paxlovid is out of reach. They reach for ginseng and ginger, right? So like they're at-home remedies that Chinese people are very confident in, and that they lean on, you know. So I think that like the big Chinese problem with vaccines is more just a reluctance to
take it.
Yeah, to take like to fall in line with modern medicine, you know. It's just like a story that we know, you know. Also, I'm not sure about the diabetes thing. I've never heard that before. I'd like to I want to follow up on that, you know, later. Yeah, it's interesting for me to hear that because I didn't know that. Yeah. But yeah, as for what's going on now and how things have progressed, I think that like China now is, and like we don't know very much. Within like I think like 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out from zero COVID being lifted, so this puts us like squarely in the new year, right? Like at like the turn of the year, China releases a report that says there have been 0 COVID related deaths in the country, right? Kind of a ridiculous claim. Nobody buys it. And the reason why is because the reason why they can make this claim, one, I think is because they're not like very concerned with like putting out something that like can be evidentially backed. But secondly, they put out this number in relation, they put out this number and they say that the number reflects how many people are dying from COVID by itself without any sort of like comorbidity, right? Without any like compound factors in that infection, right? So it's not COVID with like pneumonia. It's not COVID coupled with like high blood pressure. It's not COVID coupled with like diabetes. It's not COVID coupled with any other, like any number of like other risk factors that might contribute to the death of an individual, right? So like if you're dying from COVID related and that is coupled with some other pre-existing health condition, they're not counting that death, right? And I don't think they're being very careful about the numbers either. Then like a couple weeks later, China comes out and the official number right now is something like, I mean, as of like, I don't know, maybe like 2 weeks ago, the official number that China put out was 80,000 deaths, right? 80,000 COVID related deaths, which is very low considering the size of the country, the real scale of this wave, and I think that number is like largely not believed as well in the world community, and for good reason, because it's like an astoundingly low number. Although like they admit that like now they're counting comorbidity, but I think like it leads to a couple things. I think it points to a couple things. One, that China is not trying to be accurate with their numbers in reporting the actual extent of this spread in the country, right? Secondly, I don't think that China has the ability to actually tally that number. I don't know that China has the infrastructure necessary, like the information infrastructure necessary to actually count those deaths, because I think there are a lot of deaths that are happening outside of hospitals, right? That are like, there are deaths happening at home where people don't get treated, and like any number of variables might come into play how a person might actually pass from a COVID related death, right? Like from what we can infer, and like none of this is very well known outside of just like what, like at least to the Western world, and I think in China as well. I feel like the only thing that we know about what's happening in China, and especially in hospitals in China, is reports from like Western reporters who walk into Chinese hospitals to see what's going on, right? Yeah. They're just like, they're completely anecdotal stories that are told of like how busy like an urban hospital is in China, right? There are numbers being pushed out right now that like you'll hear in conversation people saying like anywhere from like 90 to 99% of the population has been infected at this point, right? Crazy figures.
Yeah.
Crazy figures. But a lot of that is also very anecdotal, but it's based on a different sort of anecdotal evidence, which is social networks, right? It's like people talking to family members in China, right? Or like people that they know in China, right? So like there are friends of mine who have like friends in China right now, and they say like they got COVID in the past couple weeks, and like everyone they know got COVID in the past couple weeks, right? Okay. So like it's like a near 100% coverage rate, right? Like I've talked to my own dad. He said like every single person that he knows has gotten COVID. Everyone he knows has gotten COVID except for like he somehow has avoided it, right? Because he just like stays inside, you know. But like it really is rampant, and it's everywhere right now, you know. So like you can know that I think to a reasonable extent that hospitals are over encumbered in China, but I think there are two crises in China that are evolving distinctly from each other. There's one in urban areas and one in rural areas, because the healthcare system in China is very, very different, and the kind of healthcare you're going to receive is very different whether you're an urban resident or a rural resident. So people living in metropolises, they may or may not, like depending on their income level and their status in their society, have access to a hospital bed. They might have access to medications to like treat their infection. They might have access to Paxlovid if they're willing to pay that price, right? Right now, like just from like my most recent research, which is not like completely up to date, but like from what I've heard, Paxlovid can go for a couple thousand for a regimen, you know, and I'm talking like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a regimen of Paxlovid, right? It's a luxury commodity right now. Mm-hmm. It's scarce and it's in high demand. I know there's like a whole black market that's risen up around like Paxlovid in China, and that I think is indicative of the urban market that's grown out of this wave, right? Like you see a lot of people needing that care, and it comes on like a priority basis, right? Like you buy yourself a treatment, you buy yourself good treatment through power and status and wealth, you know. I don't think that's really surprising to a lot of people. I think it was like much the same in the Western world as well, you know. Like I think we saw that during like our like first like awful waves of COVID, especially like at the beginning of the pandemic, before any vaccines came out. Like there was a lot of like very unfortunate prioritization of who was getting treatment and who wasn't. Then in rural areas, you have some different you have a totally different ecosystem. A lot of these rural areas, they are not close to hospitals, right? You don't have access to that hospital. A lot of these rural areas, the whole healthcare system largely is upheld by, I think what they call them is barefoot doctors, right? These are people who don't have a medical degree, right? They're not actually practicing doctors with like that have gone to med school and gone through like a residency and gone through like all of the rigmarole of gaining that like status of being like a licensed practitioner of medicine, right? But they have some certification, and they're more like people who learn on the job for how to treat people, right? A lot of these people are very trusted community figures, and for like everyday illnesses and for everyday treatments, they're actually very, very effective, right? Like these are extremely effective health practitioners who don't charge a premium for their care, number one, and like that makes them accessible to people in rural areas. China, despite being like a socialist and a communist country, doesn't offer free healthcare, so you're paying for your stays. The hospitals operate on a profit scheme, essentially. Like if a hospital has an MRI machine, you're going to go to that hospital, you're going to pay a premium for that hospital because they have that machine, and they're going to try to get you to get an MRI whether you need it or not, because they can charge you for it, you know. So in a lot of cases, like these more affordable practices that are set up by like barefoot doctors, they're much more effective for these communities. And these kinds of doctors, they can treat things like diabetes, they can treat things like high blood pressure, right? They can treat a lot of the things that people deal with on a day-to-day basis, like more common illnesses. They can prescribe medicine. They know what to prescribe in those cases. You know, these are relatively simple diagnoses. That system, I believe, is being phased out in China in favor of a more strict and systematic healthcare system in these areas. You can see like a lot of like hospitals being built in these areas, and I think China's approach to this largely is to build more hospitals, more giant hospitals, 8 to 10,000 bed hospitals, because they think that's what's getting them through this wave of the pandemic, right? And you can see these facilities being built, but they're not investing that money in underpinning the more preventative, like cost-effective healthcare that people might receive. They're putting that money into like the most expensive kind of development, like last ditch effort, like last frontier of treatment, right? That like is for a lot of Chinese citizens cost prohibitive. I think like that's like, I mean, I think that's kind of like just like my summary of like what I've come to know about what's happening in China. We'll open up the discussion now to like thoughts. Yeah, what do you guys think?
Amar, you want to take it first?
Yeah, I was just thinking about something while Josh, you're filling us in. Like, for me, like I always think about the moments that we remember, because when like a country is going through like a COVID crisis, like it's important to be like, where were we when we were also in a COVID crisis? People would say we still are, but if you live in America, it doesn't feel like it, because we kind of have this sense of it being over, traditionally speaking. Like
well, even the Biden administration, they're saying officially the national emergency is going to be over in May. They've already announced that,
right?
And most people said it's not already over.
And what like, institutions that you go to daily require either a mask or a vaccine, or
Well, like, you're in New York. In New York's hospitals just announced that they're going to no longer have mask requirements and things like that. So they're starting to ease up on their COVID requirements as well. So that's a big step.
And their epicenter, or our epicenter, was initially New York, and that was damn near 3 years ago, right? So it's like we really feel this kind of sense of like, okay, like that happened. But the reason why I want to bring it up is because, one, it's important to empathize, because when a country's in it, you're like, we feel you, it sucks, we were there, you're gonna get through it. And then it's like this chickenpox, you have it all and things will get better. But I remember when like the initial debates about how to deal with COVID, it became very strictly like a party line thing, where you were either like, hey, like it's not a big deal and we should feel free to get exposed to it because it's not going to kill us. Like that was like a very like strong like rhetoric piece that a lot of like Republicans, for example, were kind of like preaching, right? It was either not scary and the numbers were false, which is kind of bullshit, right? Because it was scary, people were dying, but there was this kernel of like, it's gonna happen, like let's get it over with, that I always kind of vibed with, because I was like, well, I didn't get COVID until Omicron, and it sucked, and I wasn't even in America. I haven't gotten COVID in America, knock on wood, but it's besides the point. What I'm saying is like, there are a million different ways for us to get to where we are today, and in China specifically, like there was really only one way this was going to happen. One, it started in China, so I think a lot of their national precedent was to set an example for the rest of the world on how to contain this thing, right? Like it was the first, okay, let's pony up, boys, we have a pandemic on our hands. How do you effectively contain it, right? And so they were kind of the leaders in that. And then from afar, when our numbers were hundreds of thousands of cases per day and China's were next to zero, um, I think the conversation shifted from what we were doing wrong and what they were doing right, but now it's kind of like this sea change, because we had a million people die, right? But I say had, so it becomes this thing where you have to remember what happened, and our memories are fickle in this age, right? Like, if something pops off tomorrow, you're going to forget about what happened the week before. That's just the age that we live in. The information age is very fast. So with China, it's just this thing where I'm hoping, one, they've reported that the cases have peaked, right? At least that's what their numbers were in December. So, and I don't think it has peaked since then. So for me, that indicates that, like, at least like that moment was kind of like what we'd experienced as our peaks, right? And so hopefully it's just gonna go down from here, right? And then maybe, I have some friends. They don't live in China, but it's interesting to get their experience on it, because they had visited China during zero COVID, and it was very different for them. But I mean, we all got here at some point. Some people in our respective nations died more than others, right? But it's not necessarily a win and loss thing. It kicked all of our asses. So I think one thing that's important is when you read a lot of articles on this, like especially from a Western perspective. For example, BBC wrote a recent article on zero COVID, and it's the headline is zero COVID in Wuhan. Mother is being surveilled while having COVID. Like, and they're using these buzzwords that we kind of like get afraid when we think about it, right? Because we think authoritarian. They're trying to convey this sense that they're doing it wrong, and this is like the most terrifying thing that you could live with from a Western perspective, right? 3 years of your life where things got taken away from you, and but I think we're still at this. I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts about what we can say, about it as like a whole. I don't think there's a lot of right and wrong, which is what I feel, but I want to hear Will and Josh. You also.
So, yeah. So I mean, I think in comparison, I don't think the best comparison for China is to the U.S. Just in terms of how the epidemic spread around the world. I would argue that the best comparison is India, which when COVID hit India, it hit in such a way that it really just couldn't be stopped, and people didn't have enough access to hospitals, and it just flew throughout the country. And all my friends who I know from India and who were following that story at the time pretty much agreed, like, it was an unstoppable shit show.
Yeah.
And I would say that's the worst of it. That's really the worst it could be. And it seems like China is not in such a different course. They're a little bit more prepared in the sense there's a little more data out there. There's more medication out there. There's some better strategies on how to treat. But like, in terms of infection rates, that's what we're kind of dealing with. Amar, it's interesting that you're talking about like the right and wrong way to handle it, because China was sort of touted as that model at the beginning of like, listen, you could do this, you have a zero COVID kind of plan if you shut down. But I spent 2021 and 2022, at least part of each year, in South Korea, and that was also touted as the model of how to handle things, and they never shut down, right? They never had mandatory closures on businesses, and like, schools didn't really, I don't think they really closed, but if there were ever COVID cases, it was a really big deal. Like, I remember, in 2020, winter 2020, we were having hundreds of thousands of cases per day, and when I got to Korea, like, people were telling me like, hey, you got to be careful, man, it's October now, and like, we've had 70 cases in this city, and it's a city of 1 million people. Oh, we got 70 cases? Like, it was really, really nothing. And they really experimented with some things too. But I remember like there were curfews, there were limits on how many people could eat with you at a time. There were vaccination requirements to go out to eat. you had to fill out registries, essentially leaving your phone number and contact info. So like, for instance, my coworker, he went to the gym, and then they called and said like, hey man, like, you were at the gym at the same time as someone who had COVID, so you should not go, like, you can't go to work for the next 2 or 3 days, and you have to go get tested. Like, the government contacted him, and, you know, my boss was, like, super angry. Because it's like, oh, don't go to that gym, Alex. Like, we need you at work. But, like, that was, like, people understood, like, it wasn't, like, go to work anyway or anything. Like, it was very, very strict. They even went so far as to test out the QR code system for the vaccines. Where it was like, if you needed a vaccine that was within 90 days to be able to go to restaurants, that was really implemented for about 5 or 6 weeks before they called it quits. But there was, I was like, I gotta learn how to register this. Like, I'm vaccinated, but like, I don't want to bring my paperwork. Like, I still had to buy a Korean phone at that point. I'm like, guys, just give me some time. I'm gonna make it work. And like, you know, luckily I knew some nice restaurant owners who were cool with me, but like, otherwise I couldn't have gone out to eat. And it like, every restaurant had that set up where you just had to scan in. They abandoned that. They got to the point where they were like, hey, we're at like 80% vaccination rate, at least for single dose. You know, some people were getting ready for their third dose at that point. And they said, we're going to open the country up. And then Omicron came like 2 weeks after they started implementing like opening procedures, and it just spread all throughout Korea. And this is sort of a funny story. I actually wound up in a government quarantine facility for a week. When I got COVID in Korea, I was abducted by the government because they didn't trust a non-Korean speaker at home. They said my life was in danger, and so they wanted me on site. And so I was taken in a hospital van to a makeshift hospital, and it was like Big Brother. At 7 o'clock in the morning, they would tell us in 5 different languages, in Korean and English and Chinese and Russian. It would actually change depending on who was there, I think, because it's like sometimes languages would leave and then like new ones would come on. And they would tell us like, hey, take your blood pressure, take your temperature, take your oxidation levels, and you got to report that on Kakao. You know, that's their chat app. And like, you know, we were talking with nurses. I had to like put my trash in waste barrels, and yeah, I was there for a week. 3 square meals a day. But and I didn't have to pay anything, so that goes to like, it's a good thing they've got the national healthcare system. But like, I was taking an hour out of the city I was living in to be in this facility. It was actually like right outside of a ski resort that I had been in. That ski resort just the week before. I was skiing there, and then a week later I could see skiers going down the mountain. I was like, I just want to be back there again. Like, but yeah, so it is really interesting. And then after 2 or 3 weeks after I went there, they canceled that whole thing because they were just like, they got the new president in part because of the COVID restraints, because like people were so sick of it. I was the last one of the last ones. Yeah, that was the last batch.
That sounds like a trip, man. Like, that sounds like some shit that wow.
Yeah, dude, it was so funny too. Sometimes like they didn't quite have it together, and they were clearly overwhelmed. Because like I said, they had these facilities when it was like, dude, we're talking the entire country would have 3,000 cases in a day when they set up these plants. And then by the time I was there, we had just broken 50,000 cases a day. You know, and it was, the numbers were on the way up. And because it was Omicron, but they didn't quite understand. There was no like firm data that Omicron was like that different. Like the data was not solid yet. There was like indications, anecdotal, but that wasn't a proven fact. And
right.
So they were taking it very seriously, but they were so overwhelmed, and like sometimes they'd leave the Big Brother intercom on. and like you would just hear people chatting, and like I can't understand. It was all in Korean, but it's just like you would hear like they just leave it on for up to like 20 minutes sometimes before they realize like, oh, the entire hotel can hear us just chatting shit. um it was getting to the point where clearly the staff was overwhelmed. They actually let us go a day early, I think, because they were just like, oh, there was just too many of us. Like, we needed to fill up the rooms with the next group of people. I wasn't apparently in Korea. The city hall for each city, they would determine case by case. They were determining who would have to go to a hospital or who could stay home. And then the hospitals were so overwhelmed. That's how I wound up at this makeshift one. But yeah, like they kind of went through it in a sense. Like everybody got sick at once, but everyone was recently vaccinated. People were taking good care. It was during Lunar New Year, so that was like pretty tough. But I would say they really did do it right, and like honestly, thank goodness they got rid of the Big Brother QR code stuff. That was so weird. So I can't imagine like how WeChat, like, you know, China's got no hold bar about like surveillance and making sure. I've heard they have like a green light, yellow light, red light system of like staying home. Like if you got like a green pass on your app, you're good to go. Yellow, you had to go get a test. Red, you had to stay home. Something like that. Like it sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, definitely. I think what stands out to me in this reporting is what I think about when I hear about this is really like a lot of the conversation. Like I think back to like that conversation at the beginning of the pandemic about like Korea and China, like we've been talking about, and like how they served as that like positive model, right? And I remember like a lot of the reaction in the US is like, I remember at the time there was a lot of conversation in the States about how that sort of a thing was never going to be possible in the US, right? Like how that system of COVID prevention was just not an option for the US because people wouldn't limit their freedoms like that, right? The only reason why any of that stuff is possible is because of some amount of surveillance state that civilians allowed into their lives in order to curb a pandemic, right? Like in Korea, like I think Korea did a great job with this in that like they're not like an authoritarian surveillance state, really, you know. But for the sake of the pandemic, they chose to like they came together with like an implicit contract that said like we agree to allow you to track our location and like our exposure for the sake of like our public health, you know. And then like when it came time to scale that back, they did. I think what's troubling in China is that you can see that like China is already like a totalitarian leaning state. It's an authoritarian leaning state, and like they've been beefing up their surveillance system for years before this. You know, like you hear about like a lot of the features added to China's like main like their information gathering system on citizens, you know? And I think COVID really served as like this like really great fun almost proving ground for C and the CCP to see how effective that system really was at like monitoring their citizenship, you know. And I think part of the reason why it extended for so long is because I think it's for two reasons. One, I think like China was like being practical about like the state of their ability to manage this pandemic if they were to live zero COVID, right? Like the reason why zero COVID extended so far into the future is because China is not Korea. China has a population of like 1.4 billion people, right? Like it is a massive state, and the level of pandemic control needed in order to manage that pandemic sweeping through that country is impossible to construct. You know, like the government was not ready for this crisis. They couldn't have gotten ready for this crisis, really. You know, like zero COVID is like the only thing they could do that like felt like a manageable or at least like a feasible way to fight off this pandemic. You know, but I think the second contributing factor as to why they decided to extend zero COVID for as long as they did is because they liked it. You know, they liked the surveillance state. They liked the citizenry giving that level of freedom and power to the government. It was something that like China has wanted to experiment with for a long time, and they had the reins entirely in their hands during zero COVID. They could tell citizens what they could and couldn't do. They could like put like literally like literal traffic lights in your phones telling you whether you could leave your home or not. You know? Like they set up like little police units like within like apartment complexes within apartment complexes where you would have like a government representative within your apartment complex who like would report to local government as to whether the people in your apartment complex were actually following COVID restrictions. You know, like there were snitches that they built into your neighborhoods. You know, you have like neighborhood watches that are like feeding the government information, like, and that all comes as a part of the expansion of zero COVID policy. You know, the government really, really enjoyed this experiment, and they were very reluctant to let it go, I believe. Yeah, I think like.
I mean, I think that's a very it's interesting to hear you say that for sure, because I've heard analysts with that take for sure, but I've always been like, is that real, or is that just like people slagging off communist totalitarian China? Like, and like part of me is like, yeah, of course, like that's a thing, but then part of me was just like, I don't know, like is that just rhetoric? But you know, I mean, I hear you there. I think in part that is true. Like if you look at America, they've been reluctant to give up that type of protocol as well. I mean, regardless if you're pro or against, the student debt relief package that the Biden administration is trying to put through executive order, they're saying it's because of the COVID emergency. That's their rationale. Most progressives say that you can do it without an emergency, and it's strange that that's their rationale. And they kind of, I've heard this whole argument like, oh, they're using that as the rationale so they can lose in the court, so Biden can say he fought for it, and then it doesn't work out. Awesome. But like, the argument that they are pushing is like, hey, we need student debt relief because of it's a national emergency. At the same time that Joe Biden's going out into the State of the Union being like, we beat COVID. It's like how do you have it both ways, right? Like, but I do think like it's same with Canada. Like the truckers, the Canadian truckers really had to like push the government to start undoing those restrictions. And I feel like America really followed suit, and a lot of the rest of the world did, because they knew those protests inevitably would come to their own. Everyone knew if it's like this is going to happen wherever you go if you don't ease up, because it was pretty strict. Like, yeah, in Korea it's not like that. I think they're still wearing masks indoors, but like generally speaking, like people were kind of right. Like the West, the U.S. and lots of other, like there's only so much tolerance for this. And so yeah, I think the governments really did enjoy the widespread availability of their powers under the emergency, and were reluctant to give that up. China just kind of, that was already somewhat, I guess, status quo, so people were, you know, it took longer for people to speak out, you know, in part maybe just to get the courage to speak out. It took a big event like this. So I hear you there.
Let's on the same note of when shit hits a fan and human beings have no control over it. Well, you've done some investigating on the events of the Syrian and Turkish earthquake, so I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, last we checked, 36,000 dead. And the conflict really took place in both Turkey and Syria. That's where the earthquake hit. In what one might call Kurdistan, right? Kurdistan's not a nation, but the Kurdish people live in Turkey, they live in Syria, they live in Iran, and that area, they're the largest stateless people, right? So this is the region southeast Turkey, northwest Syria that got hit with this earthquake. And so Syria is led by Assad. He's a Shiite leader in a majority Sunni country, majority Arab country. And there's been national opposition from the Kurds, who are the people that we support as Americans. We support the Kurdish people in Syria. So we've armed their soldiers. And that's been our pony in the race in this war, right? And so as the Syrian civil war has unfolded, it's led to devastation. It's led to millions of people being forced out of their homes, massive food insecurity. And so the Turks have also gotten involved. They're anti-Assad as well, but they're also anti-Kurdish separatist forces, because there are Kurds in Turkey as well, and they are considered terrorists according to the Turks, right? And so the Turks claim that the Syrian Kurds and the Turkish Kurds are working together for an independence movement. There's debates about whether or not that's true. They certainly share a similar sentiment. They want their own state. Of course, the fourth country is Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria. But so we've been working with the Kurds in Iraq as well, right? So that's typically where we go, the Sunni Kurds. And so Turkey is not inclined to treat the Kurds so well. Certainly Syrian Kurds who want to seek asylum in Turkey because of their own terrorist concerns. And so that puts Syria in a pretty tough state. They don't have many neighbors to rely on. They really rely on Iran, and they rely on Russia, right? Those are their two best friends. And that really got pretty complicated throughout the course of 2020. So you got to remember, for Syria, as bad as things were after, almost a decade of civil war, when COVID comes in and the supply chains start to shorten up, they were some of the first ones to get hit. Things got even more difficult there. Turkey and the U.S. had pretty much cleared out ISIS at that point, and the borders were sort of set up where Turkey had an Arab group that they supported in the very northwest. We had an area a little bit further to the northeast with the Kurds, and then there's the Syrian government. And so there was still conflict there. It was not resolved, even though we've essentially pulled out. So COVID's made it worse. And then when Ukraine and Russia went to war, the conflict got even more dire, right? Because those two countries, people probably know, are really responsible for food supply, especially for wheat. And Syria relied on that extensively, right? Because Russia's one of their best friends, and now Russia's preoccupied, and they don't really get the type of support that they did even just a couple of years ago. So you've got COVID, and then you've got Ukraine. You've got these terrorist conflicts going on, and then this earthquake hits, right? And it's just to make the situation how could it possibly get worse, right? You get this earthquake on top of all of that, exactly in the region where you've got all these people seeking asylum heading to Turkey. So Turkey's one of those countries that really had some big political blowback because of immigration. And their leader, Erdogan, he was inclined to essentially make a carve-out zone. He wanted to take his support in Syria and to make a little carve-out zone where, a refugee safe haven, right? Let's not bring the Kurds into the country. Let's give them a space. And also, let's bring the Arabs here, too, so we can pack in more Arabs and then diversify this so it'll be less ethnocentrically Kurdish, so we're not building a whole entire Kurdish state, right? We're going to mix these together. This kind of went against the U.S. Interest, right? When Trump pulled out of Syria, people said, "Oh, you're abandoning the Kurds," and this is sort of what they were talking about. That we kind of left them in a situation where Turkey was going to go in and take over a lot of those cities. But the point being now is with this earthquake, like for so many of these people, like where do they go for support, right? The U.S. backed Kurds we're not there, right? We don't have a troop presence, but we can get international aid there more than likely. But it's still, you've got oppositional forces from Turkey and Syria, the Syrian government. Syria is heavily sanctioned, right? And so people don't want to go through that government. And then Turkey, they've got allies in the northwest, but like we consider them terrorists. They're the people that they support. And so what a lot of these groups are finding is like, even though there is this desire for international aid to come in and it's happening in some places, like a lot of them are finding that they're on their own, right? Like, oh, you were designated as a terrorist group either by the US or by Turkey, which are opposing on their views as to which group who is the terrorist and who are the guys, the quote unquote good guys. Right? So by international standards, they've been held up as terrorist groups by one or the other. And if not that, certainly by the Syrian government, right? So there's not really any group there that's just considered like a safe, neutral place to bring in aid, right? So you have to navigate all of that. And so what people are finding is like, again, like the international groups really aren't coming in the way that you would really want, and you've got so many like communities just entirely crushed. Like these buildings, they weren't up to code. People knew they weren't up to code. There wasn't enough money to keep it up to code. Like this has been a problem for a long time. Last point, last piece, because that's a good thing to jump on. It's just like, but one thing to know about Turkey as well is just since COVID happened, the Turkish economy has really fallen quite a bit, pretty substantially. So like the Turkish lira is about half as strong as it was 3 years ago on the international market. And so they're already in an economic backspin. So for this to happen to a disadvantaged group is really, really inopportune. No one feels like they got the funding to put this back together. Erdogan said if you were affected by this earthquake, the government would guarantee 10,000 lira, which is about the equivalent of $500. Like if you lost your home, you lost your livelihood, they'd give you about $500. So that's about the best that these people are going to be able to get, assuming that they can prove, that they qualify. And if you're Syrian, it's probably not even going to be that much.
Yeah. And you were talking about what happens next. What's happening right now is a select organizations of civilians are left with the brunt of dealing with this devastation. On the Syrian side, this incredible group really called the White Helmets. If you have some time, you should watch the documentary on Netflix. It won the Academy Award in I think 2016 for best short film. But it was about the work of the White Helmets, this organization that helped that helps the neediest populations of those affected by the civil tragedies in Syria and in Turkey. And so they've been heavily invested with trying to help some of the survivors in Syria. And Munir Mustafa, who's like the deputy chief of the White Helmets, basically said that all the aid that they called upon from the Western world hasn't reached them effectively. Right? They said we needed actual equipment that hasn't come yet. Right? And so what's interesting is when you don't have a central government to actually assist in this, and the level of catastrophe that that has occurred in these places, they wouldn't have been able to, even if there wasn't a civil war. That's how dire this is, right? It's so intense that it needs so much more than just a centralized government, because at that point they're in disarray too. What you're left with is just people on the ground digging with their hands, trying to save the lives of people that have been buried. And it's so troubling, because at moments like this, you kind of realize that, like a government that is corrupt, a civil war that is unjustifiably being dragged on for 10 years by 6 different opposing forces, and they're basically using this internal strife between the Kurdish people and Syria and Turkey as pawns, right? You see a lot of that leverage between the forces that we back all the way to the forces that the Russians back, right? We know what's going on there. We've seen that for literally a decade. But when everything crushes to nothing, and there's almost nothing left to fight over, will we finally see some change? Will this be the respite that this area needs when they can rebuild? Are they going to rebuild? There's so many crazy questions, but you know that the heart of the people of Syria, of Turkey, are with those that are currently devastated, and so it's up to them, because their governments aren't there, right? And so I think that's kind of hard to wrap our heads around. I do want to, we'll get into a little bit more about some of the ineptitudes that kind of led to this being as drastic as it has been. Especially you can see that with some of, I think in the Turkish side of things, it's a little more evident. In Syria, it seemed like even with proper government intervention, because of their civil war, none of their buildings would have been up to code anyways. And to be honest, some of those areas were pretty devastated before this too, which is the wildest thing. But yeah, I just think like just donate, like actually, like just that can do something. I mean, if you have the money to, like, give to those organizations, because they're the people that are rebuilding those countries as we speak. And it's you and me. And what I mean by that is it's not elected officials. It's people that are immediately faced with where their lives are so turned upside down, and they've known this, right, for almost, some people their whole lives. They grew up within this internal strife, and so a devastating earthquake, as tragic as it sounds, is just the next insurmountable obstacle. I think when we look back in like 10, 20 years, we'll probably consider the Syrian population the most unjustly dealt with population by 21st century standards, because they've dealt with everything at this point. And so that's a crazy thing to think about, right? It's almost like, I would liken it like to what, like in the 20th century, when you see mass devastation, genocide for a specific population, and you think that those people went through some shit, and you meet them maybe around, you're like, oh, you're from that? Oh my God. Okay. Like, wow. I feel for you. Like, I'm glad you're out. Like, and you were asking about where they go and what's next. A lot. Turkey has the most Syrian refugees out of any nation, obviously, because they border them. But I think what's appropriate is to consider them as some of the most important refugee populations that we can have. But this happens too. Like 6 months ago, it was Haiti, right? Like, and so a lot of the times the scales shift, where we see the need to be able to assist because of natural disaster. I will never forget December 26th, 2004. I was 9 years old, walking to my uncle's crib after Christmas, and I'm just like seeing the tsunami that just killed 125,000 people in Indonesia. I was like, damn, like, that's a country that just what do they do from that?
Yeah,
right,
that's crazy.
But 16 years later, they're a thriving economy. Like, they're like, time healed these incredibly disastrous things, and human beings are incredibly resilient. And I think we're going to see that here. But Josh, I want you to get in on this to your thoughts. But I just think sometimes you gotta weigh who's doing the work now, and it's really those organizations that they're just like you and I, but they've been dealt with the worst.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. My feelings on this are just like, just just astonishment that I think we can all agree on that, like, this is, like, it's the last thing that this part of the world needed, that this population needed. What, like, Turkey or Syria, like, whoever we're talking about, like, we're talking about, like, 36,000 confirmed dead. We're talking about families, like, ripped apart. We're talking about homes lost, like, I think I read that there's, like, 6 million people who are functionally homeless now, and it's just, like, it's unfathomable, really, from, like, where we sit, like, to like begin to imagine, like, what these people are going through and, like, how it affects, like, a national identity. But, like, it's like a national crisis, it's a political crisis, it's a geopolitical crisis, but, like, before all that, it's a personal crisis for the people who are affected by this, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
what they're dealing with is just, like, pure unfiltered tragedy, like, compounded on tragedy for a lot of them, yeah. So I mean, all I can say beyond that is just, like, I just hope that, like, things get better, that, like, people, like, care, and that, like, we work sensitively to understand, like, what these people are going through, and yeah, that, like, the resilience of, like, the human spirit exists in this part of the world, and that, like, we can see, like, these people bounce back in, like, a real way, but yeah, in the meantime, on us, like,
Yeah.
it's just for us to try to understand and to empathize and, like, do what we can, like, I think it, like, really is on us to donate now, and like beyond that, like, just to, like, learn about this part of the world, understand what's happening, like, in this sector, and, like, and just try to, like, find our place in all of that,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the things that in some ways concerns me most is, like, because people don't, the Civil War was so complicated, and, like, people couldn't understand who was backing who, and it's religions, sects of religions that and nationalities that Americans aren't so familiar with, that people try to, they just kind of tune it out. And this is such the enormity of this tragedy can't be understated. Like, it really couldn't be worse. It's like, you think, okay, you've got a famine and there's the grocery stores don't have enough food. You've got to leave certain areas of the country because they're torn apart by war. You've got sickness, from COVID, and, we can say, oh, it doesn't really affect people that much, but it does when you're malnourished and you haven't had enough to eat in years. And less things started coming in, less and less support started coming. And now it's like the very buildings that these people were using for what little they had left are now destroyed. And so it's just the enormity of it can't be understated. And I guess what I want people to understand is, like, after the humanitarian piece of this ends, and the truth is that it ends sooner than we'd like. Our attention span is fickle, and like Amar said, 6 months ago it was Haiti. Another disaster comes, there's going to be immediate relief that, attention will turn. And the tensions are very, very high amongst these groups of people. And so we might see Erdogan try to annex a piece of Syria as a result of what happened with this. You might see the Kurds, mounting up a larger independence movement that, you know, the Turks are calling terrorist actions. You might see Assad trying to regain his grip in those areas that are under rebel control, backed by Turkey, backed by the U.S., but like rebels in his eyes. So you're going to wind up seeing. It's very likely we'll see military action take place in the fallout of this. Like, again, like if you're a Kurdish citizen, like if that's your nationality, and neither one of these governments steps up to help you, and the international community wasn't really able to get there, and they couldn't trust the mayor of your town or something like that, like, you're going to be inclined to want to start your own state. And like, it's kind of understandable. It's like, unless the Turks and the Syrians live up to their promise to take care of their citizenry, you're going to have, especially those ethnic minorities within those regions, reject that authority even more than they do now. And again, it's a flashpoint for the future militarily. And so, again, knowing Iran backs the Assad government, knowing that Turkey is really adamantly against the Kurds, knowing that we stand with the Kurds, in the truth is, like, you are right, like, Turkey takes in the most refugees. They've had backlash for it, but a lot of the refugees they take in are Arab, and the truth is very few people there are actually supporting the Arab Sunni Syrian people, right? The government doesn't reject them as, it doesn't accept them. They're not even, they say that they're a different religion. And so it's just important to understand, like, there's very few organizations around there, international and local, that are actually trying to support these people's future. So again, donate what you can, and just keep this area in your mind and in your hearts, because these things just aren't going to go away when the attention shifts. Like, there's going to be more fallout. The story's just not finished.
What does Catalan mean?
Yeah,
Pardon?
I looked up cladding. We have a chatter.
Cladding?
Yeah.
This chatter does not fuck with us.
Yeah, he does not fuck with us. We
live in a bubble according to this chatter, but what does cladding mean?
Cladding is like a layer of support on the outside of a building. So it's like a layer of support outside of like the internal structure of like a wall or something.
Ah. Yeah, okay, so this chatter thinks that
covering another.
This chatter thinks that we're in a bubble. He says we're in a bubble, so, and we're cladding, and he doesn't understand the point of the podcast. So let me tell him. We're three best friends.
Second comment, so Will can hear it. Let me just read it. Let me read the comments in order. Okay, it says.
Oh yeah, please.
They said, "What in the conversational cladding is this?" That was like 15 minutes ago. Then they said, "I do not understand the point of this podcast. These are things that people can just read off the internet. What else can you guys offer besides cladding information based on online news articles?" Then they said, "It does not change the fact that you people live in a bubble." You is all caps. And then they just said yawn, and then they hit us with a resident sleeper.
I would say they nailed it. They completely nailed it. Like, we've got so little to offer. We're just doing this because we enjoy it. It's really not about you. And if you don't like it, you don't have to be here.
Or you could be here. I don't care.
Or be here. Or you can shit all over us, man.
I think
just know that I'm coming back at you with both barrels. So fuck around and find out.
I think cladding is my new favorite word. I'm just honored to be a cladder, but listen, we're secondary education, so a lot of what we do here is just to inform. So the point is, it's not about what's on the internet. It's really just about shit that's going on, because sometimes it's interesting to talk about these things, right? But that's what we're doing right now. So we pick topics. So we've been going around, and we've done 2 now. They're pretty intense, you know. Sometimes they're not that intense. Sometimes they're pretty chill. But these last 2 have been kind of intense. So when you talk about intense stuff, sometimes you just got to get into the meat of the conversation of things, which I think you chatter might not be into. But yeah, as far as bubbles go, man. Yeah, we all live in bubbles. The point of a bubble is to try to pop it, though, you know.
Does the chatter not live in a bubble?
Yeah, that's
Is the chatter outside the bubble? Chatter, could you bring us into your world and be like, hey man, like can you show me what life is like outside the bubble? Because it sounds like they know. It sounds like they know exactly.
I do want to know
which bubble.
what bubble this mother. Yeah, that is pretty interesting to me.
That is interesting as well. And yeah, I would just say that, like, yeah, of course we're just like reading things off the internet. Like, what else are we supposed to be doing? Like, that's where we learn things. Like,
I don't read shit off the internet.
Where do you get your news?
I just listen to you 2 motherfuckers, and then I just go off the dome. What do you think this is? I just watch TV. I was trying to talk about sports. I'm not reading shit.
I'm a Nepo baby. Like a nepotism baby. Nice.
Wait, the chatter's a Nepo baby?
That's what they said. I wouldn't know because I'm a Nepo baby.
Dude, that's
good,
awesome.
Man.
Word.
That's good.
Hey.
Good for you, man.
You're one of us.
Yo,
man.
that's like a dope.
I'm not a Nepo baby.
I wouldn't say that.
Will's kind of.
It's debatable. It depends on the day of the
Listen,
week.
we're all babies.
Will works with his mom, so
all Americans are babies, man. We're all babies.
I mean, I lived with my parents for like 25 years, so I was a Nepo baby in that.
I'm just saying that's a good bubble. That's a good bubble to be in, right? Like, congrats. I'm just saying, like, good, lucky man. Like, that's a lucky chatter being in that bubble. Good for them.
That's my clatter Nepo baby, homie. Yeah.
I hope you're sitting in a fancy massage chair, like, while you're pushing that donate button. That's what I hope. I hope you're like getting ready to donate.
Don't have a donate button.
No, not our donate button. Not don't donate to us. To Syria, you doof.
No,
Syria and Turkey.
Give us a sub, bro. We'll be here. We'll play some video games. We'll play your favorite fucking video games.
Just give us a sub.
We will donate that sub to Turkey. Fuck. We can't.
I think, like,
we can't be subbing off of that. Like,
if we're gonna answer the question seriously, I think the point, like, we're here to try to engage with the news. Like, of course, like, we're not like of the news. Like, this stuff isn't happening to us, you know. Like, we try to read, we try to stay abreast of like what is happening in the world, and like this is really our attempt to try to like break out that bubble and like come together as friends and like try to like engage with what's happening in the world, so we can like try to fix our perspective or like widen our perspective and like learn something along the way about the world that we're living in. Like,
in the words of Gil Scott Heron, the bubbling of the mother country's crotch.
Yeah,
that's what he says.
That's what we are. That's the bubble we live in.
Speaking of fucking wild moments from My Beautiful Dark, Rihanna did All the Lights.
Yeah, so brave.
That was so first of all just awesome, because right after she did the hook, the people I was with, we just immediately jumped into the Kanye verse, and we were like, "Oh, this is not gonna happen." Okay, never mind. But shit, dude.
And then she followed up with another song that Kanye featured on.
Run This Town.
She did Run This Town right after that.
And then she did Diamonds, which she did a remix for.
Yeah.
She had
and then in Umbrella, like, if I think she was gonna bring the throne out, and then Yeezy did his thing.
I think she
the Nazi thing.
The Nazi thing.
Oh my god.
The Nazi thing.
That's what you're saying.
I think she was good. I think she was gonna bring out Yeezy and Hove, and then after the Nazi thing, she's like, I'm not gonna bring out either of these motherfuckers.
She still could have just brought out Hove, but like, it wasn't about either of them. It was about her.
Yeah, but would that have been like? Just imagine that headline. Is that dope? Is that dope if she just brings out Hove?
No.
But God,
no, it's not.
Also, there's no reason for that. She didn't bring out any. She did.
I like the throne either. You know, that wouldn't have been cool either.
I agree to disagree. People missed the throne, man. People wanted that. There was hope for that.
I don't know.
You know.
Well, relax, because I think by people you mean fucking you, because there was no discourse on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What did you not say that Jail was your favorite song of 2021?
I love every minute of Jail. The non-drum loop part, like, I love it. But the reality is like that I think she showed that, like, one, like, a lot of the times with these Super Bowl halftime shows, like, the artists will bring out like people to get people hype, right? But the cool thing about Riri is that she's just always been able to just post and people are cool with it. Like, it was one of the like most like complacently awesome performances. Like, just I'm talking body language. Obviously she was pregnant too, which is the best part of it. But at first I had no idea if she was, but just the way she was just kind of grooving and she was just in her element. It was this one. I thought it ended way too early. I was like, shit, she could have done like 10 other bangers, for real. Like, she didn't even do the song off Auntie or anything like that. Like, Ree could have just went for like forever.
She did, yeah, man. She did work.
Oh, is work off Auntie? Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
Of course. But yeah, I thought it was a great performance. Just overall, what was interesting is she like picked moments where she was like singing and then she wasn't. And I always think that she could just give so much more. Like, she's Rihanna. I think she's got one of the most unique voices like that we've heard in pop music. It's always so cool. But the fit was great. The game was great too. I mean, we can get into that if y'all want, but I did want to just talk about.
Hold on. What more did you want? Like, she had a dope fit, dope dancers, was floating in the sky, brought countless classics that everybody knows, whether it's me or my mom or fucking whoever. Like, what else do you want from a show?
I wanted more songs. That's all I want. I wanted like
More songs,
I wanted Ponder Replay. I wanted like weird deep cuts, like Rude Boy. I don't give a fuck. Like, I could have just.
She did Rude Boy.
Oh, nice. Like, that's the cool thing about Rihanna is like that her discography is actually so deep that she can like go in there and like you could still be like, oh damn, she could have done this song. She could have done that. Well, yeah, no. I thought it was again great, but every halftime performance has like something to be desired. Like, that's kind of like the point of it. Like, I think there's always something that can be different. It's never gonna be like just like a perfect 10. Like you said, the throne could have been there. That would have been fucking wild. It didn't happen though. But yeah, it was great. It was just good to have her back too. Like, I think the world missed her. She's obviously just like having a family and like she's a billionaire, so she doesn't need us. But it was good that we got her back for that moment. And ASAP was there, and like that's her boy. So just shout out to her boy. He's holding it down.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was there in like a wife beater with like a big like American flag, like football. Like,
he's bringing back the American flag. You know me, I used to rock the American flag bandana.
He fucking loves the American flag, dude.
He loves it.
Drape himself in the American flag.
He's a flagger.
Yeah.
No, I mean, he did, right? That's the album cover, yeah.
Yeah.
From back in the day.
Yeah. 2 album covers.
Yeah. 2 of them.
Yeah.
He was doing it. He was doing it, man. Did
you ever think of A$AP Rocky as an All-American? Like.
No. Yeah. Totally.
No.
I think that's an apt phrasing. Yes. From the dollar sign in his name, to peso as an introductory. What's more American than the peso? Built off that shit,
I mean, it's North American.
Bro. Yes, bro.
No.
I guess it's all Americas. That's a different type of all American.
Yeah. Also, I mean, like, think about that currency. Like, where does it come from? It comes from Mexico. Like, we're built off that shit. Come on. But yeah. I mean, I love ASAP, but this is.
Argument.
Come on.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say too much about it, but I just think it's subtle. It's a subtle thing. I'm not gonna get into it. It's kind of evident what I said.
That's
like
you spit a lot of nuance.
But I love ASAP. I love Riri. I love their energy was there. The game was cool. So let's get into the game a little
Wait,
bit
but
because
Rihanna is pregnant. We didn't even cover that.
yeah,
What's there to say?
Bro,
What do you
she's
want to say
pregnant.
about it?
It's
second
cool.
baby.
Yeah,
Second
it's
baby.
Cool. It's
She
also
was-
cool.
I
She
think-
was the first pregnant woman to ever perform at the Super Bowl. That's kind of sick. That's why, like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's what, like, really is like the crowning, like, cherry on top of her performance. That, like, she came out, rocked her shit, did the dances, like, had this like extravagant display. And, like, she was like hanging in the air
did
and
the
shit.
dances? That I guess I don't know because I don't feel like she did the dances.
She's
That's one
pregnant,
thing where I
man.
gotta
That's the
disagree.
point. That's the thing, though.
Hey, you can't have it both ways. Oh, she came out pregnant. She did
was
the
dope.
dances.
She did
Nah,
the dances.
She came out.
She did her dances,
She came
and
out.
she was pregnant.
She ain't do the dances,
As a
bro.
pregnant woman, she came out
Those
and did the
dances, those were not dances. That was
Nah,
cool,
she was good.
but those
The
were not
way-
dances.
The
That was
tail move-
that was a big old waddle.
Nah,
the
it
tail
was
move.
cool. It was cool. I thought
She
it
was so high up in the air that it gave me a feeling of dread. I was just like,
cool, definitely.
considering every scenario, I was like, what? Like, it was just terrifying how high she was in the air and how
I saw
small
someone
that
Photoshop
platform
one
was.
Smash Brothers characters on it. That was great.
Yeah,
That was a whole
yeah, they were doing the V. They were doing the V for sure. They were definitely alluding to the Smash Bro era with that. It was great. It was great. And yeah, she's pregnant, which means there won't be a world tour. There probably won't be another record. But it wasn't about that. I was like for sure I was like, yeah, she's not gonna debut anything, but she's gonna put out a song after. I was like, oh, and then there'll be a world tour. Like I think we all anticipated, we were all wrong.
She might put out a song. Who knows? I mean, she might.
Dude, I
She
heard
might-
the Chadwick Boseman tribute song the other day
Hmm.
when I walked through a Dick's liquidation warehouse store. It was like a
Dick
pop-up
liquidation.
store for Dick's liquidation. Yeah.
What is
Dick's Sporting Goods. It was like a Dick's Sporting Goods.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, they were just
like pop-up store, and they were playing the Chadwick Boseman tribute as I was browsing like the $10 shoes that they had.
Black Panther 2. Riri.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, this song isn't that good. I was like, come on, man.
I was.
It's
like
not
that.
supposed to.
Josh wasn't into it.
I was like,
People-
this arrangement is not it, dude.
I haven't heard any Rihanna fans rep that track, and I was like, come on, it's not supposed to be repped. It's just a beautiful song. That's just like, that's fine. Like, what are you
Yeah, I
gonna
know,
do with?
It's fine, dude.
What are you gonna do with that track? Like,
It's a good. It's
She's
a good
done
song. It's
soundtrack
not.
songs before. She did soundtrack for she did a song for like an animated movie that she like was a voice actor in. Like that's not.
I
Like,
think
a
Will
song
will.
that you're supposed to
I think Will agree with this. The only soundtrack song that ever lived up to its name, Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man.
Sunflower. Hey.
Sunflower is like the only song for like a soundtrack that was
Anthem,
like
bro.
that like really
better
lived
than
its life.
better than anything. Yeah, it was better than anything that came out.
Wasn't that? Didn't that?
That's a
that
good
song,
movie,
broke
though.
Records, right? The song broke streaming records when it came out, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was like a
it did.
legendary like breakthrough in like
Right.
commercial pop. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, that song did its thing.
But yeah, we gotta talk about the game, boys. We gotta talk about the game, boys. So a few things happened in the Super Bowl of note. It was a legacy game. So there's this cat. His name is Patrick Mahomes, and he's the greatest gift to football that there has ever been. He is unequivocally the greatest gift to football that has ever been. I'm not saying he's the greatest player of all time because obviously Thomas Evan, he's got all the records. I don't even want to get into this if he can, but I'm just talking about the majesty of this man. And so one thing that I immediately likened to it, we are watching our generation's Michael Jordan currently when you see Patrick Mahomes play. He has that level of creativity. There's that interesting saying. It's like a Walter Isaacson thing. It's like the intersection between like art and science is creativity. That's what's born out of that, right? This is what this guy does. He moves in a way that challenges physics. The way that he contours his body to put the ball in the perfect spot so he does all the intangible things better than anybody really ever has. He's got the biggest arm in the game, can move for the first down with his feet in ways that always gets it, you know? He can always find the right man when he needs to, but he's also the fucking clutchest player ever, dude. This guy is so clutch. He will win any game. It just doesn't matter. I mean, we've also seen one guy like this before, but that guy didn't throw the rock like this kid, right? This kid is 10 days younger than I am. I'm 27. Patty Mahomes' birthday. He's actually a month later than mine. So he's not even 28 right now. And he's already won 2 Super Bowls. And he's been to 3. And the one that he lost, his head was about to hit the turf, and he was throwing footballs that were hitting the helmets of his wide receivers. He was getting chased around the whole field. He had no offensive line. He could have won. He should have won that fucking game. He just didn't have a team. Like this guy. And I'm an Aaron Rodgers guy, as you guys know, diehard Aaron Rodgers guy. And Rodgers was the first guy that I was like, oh my god, he throws the ball greater than anybody's ever thrown it. Like he's majestic in this way, and everybody has this thing that they fall in love with Rodgers. And what's so nice about Mahomes is that he's like Rodgers, but he wins, you know, and he wins in a way that is so beautiful, and it's like written like a script, right? And so that's just a great thing to see, like, and it's a great thing to be able to like be a part of as a national conscious, because you only get to experience this. Like we've gotten very lucky with some of the GOATs. Another GOAT had a great moment this week too. We don't really have to get into it too much, but it's just LeBron, you know, doing his thing, getting the most points. You know, he's obviously 2 on the list to everybody for MJ, and you can there's a lot of parallels, right, between these two, Patty and LeBron, with Jordan and Tom Brady. The reason why is because in the LeBron sport, you have Jordan, who went 6 for 6, so he's kind of untouchable. He's like the perfection of it, right? And everybody knows that he's the greatest ever. And LeBron can't really get there because he's lost 5 in the finals. He's only at 4 chips. One of them was in this asterisk bubble. But he does things that are just intangibly incredible, right?
I gotta ask a question. Why is the bubble finals such an asterisk? Why is that such an asterisk on LeBron's legacy? It's important to note that with the bubble, the conditions were leveled for everyone, right? So I actually view it as a pretty impressive championship. I grew up a Lakers fan. I'm really a Bucks fan because of Giannis. I never had a problem with the bubble win. Like, I don't understand why anyone put an asterisk next to it. People generally say he is, like, not generally, he has 4, right? But the point of it is to just be like, well, let's dissect him because we don't have anything else to talk about. So at that point, you're always going to just be like, what the fuck was the bubble? Also, it's a pandemic thing, right? Like we just didn't know what the fuck was going on. It was very impressive what he did. Played good basketball. Like, I mean, like, they were competitive.
Yeah.
It was competitive basketball, and they were playing like real fucking games. And he made it through the fucking playoffs run, and then he made it to the fucking finals, and then he won the damn finals. Like, everyone was playing that same game.
Yeah.
You know? And like, AD was healthy.
Did
like,
anyone not make it into the bubble? Forgot.
Yeah, I mean, the bubble was a tournament. There was a play-in tournament at the bubble, but there were some teams that weren't, their records weren't good enough. So, but there was an 8-game. They basically had 8 games of the rest of the season. But I mean, the bubble is neither here nor there. We all live in bubbles, and we're all cladding.
Hey,
we're all cladders.
We're all cladding for the bubble.
But the reason why I just wanted to talk about this is because, like, in our lives, there are just people that move the needle in a way that, especially in sports, are so historic. And I'm always of the mindset they just need to be cherished for who they are. Like, and that happens ever so often. And there's so much from like a national discourse perspective about like them as players and like their like who they are. But at the end of the day, they just gave you greatness every day in, day out. And we're seeing that really. Patty is like in his apex, and with LeBron, we've just had 20 years of that, and we're kind of at the bookend. I mean, LeBron's probably going to give us a few more years, but but what I just wanted to pay attention to is like if you're just like a casual fan, if you're just somebody who enjoys it, like Patty's the guy that can like actually make you enjoy watching it, because when he was in the presser talking about them being down in the first half, they were like, hey, what was going on with your team? And he was like, we just weren't playing with the joy that we normally do. You know, that's the word he used, joy, right? And like that's like not a football word. Like people don't really interject that when they're talking about winning Super Bowls. Like he was like, there just wasn't joy. And then you know what they did? They had a perfect second half because he said he was playing with that joy. Like this guy does something with sports that he makes it more about, and he doesn't, it's not necessarily the way he conducts himself or like how his life is or anything, but it's just about his this uncanny ability to make art into this, right? I heavily believe that sports are art. Like I think that like that disconnection has kind of like caused us to view this from like this jock lens of like not understanding really what this is about. But it's poetry in motion. It's really this aspect, and there are few people that get it there and translate that for people of all types in places to see like, oh, that's just the most beautiful thing, and Patrick Mahomes fucking does that, and he needs to be cherished. And that's my 2 cents on that. But just wanted to hear your thoughts too about the game, where y'all were at, what y'all were doing.
Yeah, I was with my girlfriend at home, watching the game. Yeah, and she doesn't know shit about football. She was asking me like, so like how does this work at the end of the game? Like towards the end of the game, she was finally kind of tuning in because I was cussing so much throughout it, and I didn't follow the season, but like this is like where I'm invested. You know, like I'm not like an avid football watcher. I like tried at the beginning of the season to start watching football, but like on Sundays, like my girlfriend was just like so apathetic with the TV having football on all day that like I didn't keep up with it, you know. But this I planted my flag. I was like, I'm watching the damn Super Bowl, and I was fucking in it. I was enthralled by the game, and when he sprained his ankle, I was so fearful for the game, for him, for like his legacy.
I thought they were done. I thought the game was over.
It was a terrifying moment, and like Grace didn't understand it, and I told her like that's like imagine like if like the Mavs made it to the finals and like Luka fucking sprained his ankle. Like that's what just happened, you know? Like that's just what happened to you.
So real quick too, that was he re-sprained it. So 3 weeks ago, Patty's ankle basically gets caught under this dude, and so that was the initial injury, and he comes back in that game, so he can barely move it. So he's had basically these last 3 weeks to get it to a point where he can move, and then you know he lands a little funky, so he retweaks it. And like if you've ever retweaked an injury, you're kind of like, oh, that's awful, right? Yeah. People have been, it's been an interesting discourse too. Well, I'll let you get in here, but I just wanted they like, because if you've ever played like he like everyone's assuming that in this for like before the half they just gave him some shit. They just put a shot in him to make him not feel his leg anymore.
That's what I told Grace. I was like, you think they gave him like adrenaline behind the scenes?
Yeah, like, it's like
they probably did. It's like, well, no, they can't, because like don't they test for that? It was like,
no, it's a different, it's a painkiller. You can give him a painkiller, like for sure. He definitely took some shit. That
like they're injecting like lidocaine into his fucking ankle.
I forget what it's called, but there's a thing that the NFL that's like totally fine for players to use, like but yeah, I mean, and it's adrenaline too. Like this is a Super Bowl, like he's gonna have to play on this, like
it's got enough adrenaline, I'm sure. From
it was a little theatrical because he can run. He was running at full speed.
It was insane watching him run after the injury. Just like to make those like huge runs like out of the pocket, I was like, "What the fuck is wrong with this guy?" Like that ankle hurts so bad. I know I sprained my ankle last year falling off a climbing wall, and it hurt so bad, and I was like limping for like the next week on that thing. You know, like to think about running on that, like in a competition setting like that, like I was tearful, man. It was
what about you? What were your thoughts?
I was just, it's what I think every time I watch football. It's just like there's just so much dude squishing dude. Like I was watching Mahomes, and during that moment where he sprained his ankle, like that dude landed on him, and his foot bent away. Feet shouldn't bend, and I was like, wow, that's like not. It was like not 90 degrees, but it was like 85 degrees in the wrong direction, and I was like, that looks really painful. And then he was running on it after that. He probably would have liked an extra couple songs from Rihanna, but like apparently he got just enough because it was like he was able to move on it. There was a great moment where one guy got tackled. The guy didn't grab him. He just jumped into his knees. He jumped into the guy's knees, and that knocked him over. And I thought that was pretty amazing. I just started thinking about if I was running and like a 300-pound man dove into my knees, and then like I were to fall over, like it's just a pretty astounding sport. Like I just think that's pretty amazing. It's like it wasn't like because when we play tackle football and stuff, like we'll play every once in a while, and like
We don't play tackle.
even when I was a kid,
We don't play tackle. We play two.
oh yeah, you guys are pussies. I used to play tackle when I was a child. I stopped playing because you guys don't play. But
When did you stop playing tackle football?
I don't know, when I was like 11, 12.
11, 12. So what? You played like 3 years of like kiddie tackle football?
Yeah.
You can't call grown men pussies because you played tackle football when you were a child.
You didn't even
All
play
right,
organized. You didn't even play organized tackle football. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's correct. Well, my this is a NEPO baby thing. My family would not let me. I asked to play football. I wanted to join the Buffalo Grove.
The Bills. The Buffalo Bills.
The Buffalo Bills. And my mom was on the fence, and she asked my father, and he vehemently denied it. He said, "You got to protect your brain." And I didn't know, but my mom never told me that he was the one who said no. They discussed it, and it was denied. And my application to play football was very heavily denied. So I didn't get to continue my tackle career.
One of my greatest failures was not turning you into an incredible football player. I needed
you would have been at odds with my family. So it is what it is. It is what it is.
I always thought you had it in you. You just had the size, the speed, but you just couldn't catch it.
You know how many people told me that?
I remember playing tackle football against Tyler. We played one time, like with Aaron and Tyler, and it was us with Will. And I remember Tyler fucking decked the shit out of Aaron, and Aaron spun like a doll midair. And he was on his feet one moment, and then Tyler hit him in the neck, and he span around, and he hit his fucking head on the ground first. It was insane. He spun so fast, his body didn't drop an inch. It was like his head were just where his feet were when he first made contact with the ground. It was insane. And Will, you were untouchable that game because no one could tackle you. No one could get you on the ground. Not even Tyler, man. No one could pull you down.
That's a good time. See that? I remember that. That was a good time. Yeah. So for me, football, I wasn't even gonna watch the Super Bowl. It was out of the background. I was working on some music stuff, and then the game just wound up being pretty interesting. Just in terms of like the early lead from Philly. And then the fumbles, man, even though only one of them counted, but I say, fuck, some intense calls, intense game.
Dude, some people think that the game was staged, scripted.
Why not?
They think it's WWE.
That's the funniest shit. That's like the funniest.
People say that. People say that about every sporting event.
Some people say, yeah. I mean,
it's not staged. It could be, yes. There could be vested interest on a referee's part. Yes, that could move the needle. But
for that holding
No,
call at the
I'm
end?
just saying,
I
like,
don't think so.
Why
I think it was a
why
totally
can't it
reasonable
be
holding
staged?
call.
Why couldn't they stage it? Tell me, like, come
because
on, bro.
Dude, it's sports.
that
Like,
is
those
the
catches are
fucking
impossible to
dumbest.
make. Like,
That's the fucking
on like a
dumbest shit that I've
on a
ever heard.
scripted
That's
tip.
why I can't. There's really no retort besides it's just the dumbest shit I've ever heard.
Yeah, like, what are you supposed to do? Like, you're supposed to tell a dude to like run 50 yards and like catch a ball over another dude's head like that? Like you can't script that. You can't script these plays. You know,
You can't
like,
script the catches, that's for sure.
man. Like,
Anyways,
these people are doing like
Well,
superhuman things.
obviously, I agree, but I hear, no, I mean, it doesn't matter what sport it is. You hear people say that after every single one.
They're talking corruption on the ref at the end. That like it was a bogus holding call in like the most critical moment of the game, and it lost Philly the game because it allowed for them to get that first down, right?
I mean, my thoughts are pretty simple on that call. It was a bullshit call.
True.
It was super ticky-tacky. They hadn't called anything like that all game, but it does not indicate favoritism. What it indicates is one ref seeing something and then corroborating that with their team, and then them saying that's the call. It's just what happens in football, right? Like, if you see it, and then you flag it. It's right. Like a complete reflex to that point, and he saw just a little bit of movement, and he said, okay. He was out, and Patty did a good job of overthrowing Juju, and it kind of looked like, oh, could Juju have been there? There's no way he would have gotten to it.
No way. There's no way.
It was as a cornerback, it was terrible to see it because I'm always in the hands. It was just fucking trash, and it also it jagged the ending of that game, but. Yeah. The Chiefs would have fucking won anyways. Like what do you want? Like, this is Patrick Mahomes. Like, he does not lose those games. Like, the Eagles haven't won a game like that this whole fucking year. Like, Patty has done that.
Well, it was interesting. They said Patty came back like roughly 50% of the time when he was down. He was able to come back. It was like 10 times. He was like 10 for 18 in coming back if he was down at the half. Whereas who's the QB for Philly?
Hurts.
Jalen
Hurts. He was 19-1 in his career for being ahead at the half. So it's like the chances of him losing. It's only the greatness of a truly remarkable player that made that happen.
Yeah, and it was
a remarkable second half. I know Philly did all the work for the win.
You were talking about shit being scripted. The only thing that was scripted was Patrick Mahomes being the most clutch thing that we've ever seen. Because that's what's scripted. Because what I mean to say is, like,
it is written.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's fate to this where momentum lies with the person that can exude it. Why did Tom Brady come back 28-3? Because he's like one of the only guys that can do that, right? Patty's of that ilk, where it's a thing with them, where they can change the whole game based on what they're doing. It's like a mind game. It's actually like a real thing with sports, which is cool. And yeah, like, they were down 24-14, and I was 100% convinced they were going to win the game. Like, there was no doubt in my mind, because you just know with this guy, he's built different. It's a different game for him, right? He's playing something else completely compared to these other guys, which is cool to watch. So it transcends just like the bullshit juggernaut gladiatorial game that they're playing. It's more of an art form than you think, or at least I think so. But yeah, that's
all right. Are we far enough out of the bubble? Viewer?
Oh,
Makalumi?
He's gone. He gone.
I didn't ban them outright, but I did time.
He got timed.
Yeah,
that was fun. That was great. I mean, we went 2 hours.
Wait! You banned him? What'd you ban him?
I didn't ban them. I timed them out for 30 minutes.
Why?
He's getting the 30-minute timeout.
They went on to say some shit that I will not repeat.
Oh man went in. Yeah, you can't play ball with those guys. You just gotta fucking get them out of there.
Yeah.
But
I was down if he was like clowning us, you know? Like, if he was just clowning us and like asking us for the purpose of our podcast, like, I'm fine with that. Like, I don't mind like receiving that criticism and responding to it, you know? But like then he like left that domain, and I'm like, this guy's got to go.
Oh no.
Word. Oh, I love how toxic this fucking chat is. It's crazy.
Now you
It's
like it,
one
yeah.
dude.
This is
It's
what was
one
gonna
dude.
get you into it. What was like? What's the point of chat? Now he's like, oh, I'm so into it.
They're such bastards. It's amazing.
Yeah, bro. Welcome to chat. I'm so glad we have at least one motherfucker. Next time we'll have more, but
Maybe.
Or not. Who knows? Who
This dude's not
cares?
coming back. He was our only guy. But that's okay.
Yeah, that was great. That was awesome. Fucking
Yeah.
insane. Do we want to quickly end on something? On what we've been up to? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can
Okay,
start.
cool. I've been reading this James Baldwin book, If Beale Street Could Talk. It's a movie, but I haven't seen the movie, so I wanted to read it first.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll tell you guys how it is. What about you, Will?
I've been playing a lot of Persona 4.
Oh my God,
The game to
P4.
play. I keep coming back, and I have no regrets about it, man. It's just I
How
just
many
love
times?
it so fucking
Wait,
much.
how many times?
I believe it's my third time.
That's
I believe.
amazing.
It's my first time playing Golden. It's my first time playing Golden, though.
How long is a playthrough
What was
for
the-
Persona 4? Like 100?
Oh,
It's gotta be,
I
right?
don't know. I gotta be 50 hours in right now.
That's
And
insane.
by true ending, yeah, I'd assume I'm halfway done. So
Uh,
yeah, 100 hours is more or less right.
nice. Long ass
Mm.
game. Big ass Persona games. They're fat
That's
games.
awesome. Josh, what about you?
Nice. I don't know, man. I'm just reading the same book I was reading last week. I've been I don't know. I listened to some Sam Cooke today. That was cool.
Nice.
What else, man? I've been playing God of War. Still playing that because like I
God of
just
War
crawl
2?
through games. Yeah.
Oh, dude, I have to play that game, but I'm waiting for it to be on sale.
It's
The new God of War
the
2?
new God of War. Yeah, the new God of War.
The new God of War 2.
Yeah,
Yes.
the newer God of War 2.
I mean, the old God of War 2 is the best God of War, so I don't know. I mean, it's interesting.
Oh, and I've been watching Physical 100 on Netflix.
What is that?
It's like a Korean competition game show. They get like 100 like really athletic and like swole athletes out of Korea, and pit them in a game, like a survival game of fitness, and it's awesome because the challenges are fucking bonkers. They're actually just like so nuts, and like the way that they introduce these people, they have like this one dude, like the poster boy for the show is like the greatest MMA fighter to come out of like Japan and Korea. Like he's Korean born, but he's like Japanese Korean, and he like historically he's like pissed off the whole nation of Japan because he was a cheater. He was just like a greasier dude than like Japan was ready for, and he like left Japan for the UFC to fight MMA, and they were like, you're betraying our martial arts, and he's like, fuck you. I'm out here for the fucking fight, man. And his nickname is Sexy Yama, and he's just awesome. He's just like the best dude.
Sexy Yama.
He's so sick, dude. And he's just such a great team leader. He's an inspiration when I see
100.
him in the show, man. He's nuts.
You love this guy.
Oh, I mean,
I
yeah,
love
he's
him
great.
too, man. This guy sounds amazing.
He's awesome. He's awesome.
Sounds like such a fuckboy. What do you mean?
He's like the
Sounds like a
best kind of
savage.
like Japanese Korean fuckboy, and like he's not even a fuckboy like in the show. He's just like a really cool dude. He's like a really cool, solid dude.
But he could lose.
He could lose.
That's the
Yeah,
stakes.
yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
he could
dope. I
lose.
wonder. We'll update us on Sexy Yama.
Yeah,
Next
it's
time.
great because-
It's a reality show, yeah?
Yeah, it's like a reality competition show. The best thing about it is like the hook is like they get you immediately because they have 100 contestants. First episode, 50 of them are gonna get out because they go like 1v1 right away, and like basically like contestants like wrestle each other like 1v1. They're just like fighting, you know. So you get to just see everyone like duke it out at like the highest stakes, like so much like on the line. Like it's just them like by themselves, like trying to like fucking fight their way to like their next spot. Is great. Yeah.
Whoa.
These shows normally
Whoa.
don't do that, where they just pit contestants against each other like that, like immediately. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Word.
it's a cool show. I've been having fun with it.
That's dope.
Yeah.
That's dope. All right, boys. It's been fun.
All right.
All right, see you guys.
Signing off.
Deuces.